Why, hello everybody, it's Emma here, the Bookish Princess. Do you like my ghoulish friends I've got behind me? I have started decorating for Halloween. I feel like it's not too early. October is almost here. Now today's video is not a Halloween video, it is a bookish video. I have a little pyramid here of all of my favorite reads from the month of September. Alright, you guys, I think I'm going to start from the top of the pyramid. This book is called Women Who Run with the Wolves, Myths and Stories of the Wild Woman Archetype by Clarissa Pinkola Estes, PhD. It says on the front, a deeply spiritual book. She honors what is tough, smart, and untamed in women. She venerates the female soul. One of you guys actually recommended this book to me a while ago. I wrote it down on a list. My library didn't have it, which was frustrating. But then I did find it at a Barnes & Noble the other day. Oh my gosh, I love this book so much. I feel like it's something that I should have read in college. Like, it should have been on one of my great book seminars. Like, everyone should read this book. As you can see from my bookmark, I'm not quite halfway through it. It is, I feel like, a little bit slow going. It's definitely thought-provoking. It's one of those books where you, like, read a sentence and it sort of starts the train of thought, and then you end up sort of staring off into space and just following that train of thought for a couple minutes. But those are some of the best types of books. I'll read you a little bit of the summary on the back. Within every woman there lives a powerful force filled with good instincts, passionate creativity, and ageless knowing. She is the wild woman who represents the instinctual nature of women, but she is an endangered species. In Women Who Run with the Wolves, Dr. Estes unfolds rich intercultural myths, fairy tales, and stories, many from her own family, in order to help women reconnect with the fierce, healthy, visionary attributes of this instinctual nature. I think I've spoken before about how sometimes it's frustrating when people talk about feminism. Sometimes it seems like people just want to argue with you. It's like they'll make this statement that this is feminism, this is what it means to, value women, this is what it means to be a woman, and they'll sum it up in like a nice tidy sentence, and it's like, if you disagree with this, then you're just a terrible person. But I tend to think feminism is a pretty complicated thing that maybe doesn't fit in a box, that maybe doesn't fit with a nice tidy label or fit in a nice tidy sentence. And I feel like this book approaches it from that angle in such an amazing way. In fact, I'm going to have to read you a quotation. I often like to do a quote collection over on my blog, A Pinch of Pixie Dust. I've actually done it every single month this year with my favorite quotes from that month's reading. So I'm sure there will be some from this book. But where's the one I was thinking of? It just was such a unique way of putting it. I feel like she's very sort of poetic in this book. Like, she's practical and yet poetic at the same time. Like, the way the stories she tells and the language she uses is so rich and beautiful and really paints a picture. All right, I found it. In this passage, she's talking about sort of reconnecting with that wild woman. So she says, "Wild woman has no name, for she is so vast. But since this force engenders every important facet of womanliness, here on earth she is named many names, not only in order to peer into the myriad aspects of her nature, but also to hold on to her. Because in the beginning of retrieving our relationship with her, she can turn to smoke in an instant. By naming her, we create for her a territory of thought and feeling within us. Then she will come, and if valued, she will stay." That idea of a territory of thought and feeling is just so cool, and I feel like that's how we should approach things like feminism. No one has an answer or an exact definition for it because it is a territory of thought and feeling. It needs to be explored. I also think that when people talk about feminism, so often it's a, you shouldn't do that, or you shouldn't be that way. And what I love about this book, and you know what, I don't think she's mentioned the word feminism a single time. What she's doing in this book is really turning it around. It's not a sort of, wagging finger at somebody else. It's a call to action for yourself. It's sort of a roadmap to how to kind of retake your own identity. And it acknowledges that there are lots of things out in the world, out in the culture we live in, that are not right and that are sort of making this wild woman extinct. But she constantly reaffirms the power of this wild woman, the power of every woman to be herself and find her own path. And I love how she believes that that spirit can never be broken and can never be fully extinguished. No matter what you're surrounded by, there's always a way through it. And I feel like this is really practical in using different fairy tales and myths and different observations and reflections about how you can get through that. So, oh my gosh. Anyway, I'm just loving it so much, and I'm not even all the way through it. I had my Kindle in my stack because my next book is a Kindle book. And guys, I'm going to try not to go on and on about this one, but it was another huge, huge favorite. It was The Virginian by Owen Wister. I mentioned this in my last August wrap up and September TBR. My mom actually discovered this book. My mom is always reading like the best stuff. Right now she's reading the letters of C.S. Lewis, which sound really interesting. She says she actually heard about this first from this book, Mary Coulter, Builder Upon the Red Earth. I mentioned this a couple months ago. I actually bought this book when we were visiting the Grand Canyon. Mary Coulter is an architect and designer who is responsible for a lot of the amazing buildings around the Grand Canyon. But my mom said there was an Owen Wister quote in here, and I'm actually feeling now like I have to go back and reread it because I want to know where that quote was. But it was so good that she went and looked up The Virginian. Wouldn't have expected to adore a Western novel so much, but calling it a Western novel almost doesn't really express all that it is because it's also such a sweet romance. It's also an amazing adventure. It's also incredibly thought-provoking and kind of philosophical. Again, I was just constantly highlighting favorite quotations. One of my favorites was, "Stand on your legs, you polecat, and say you're a liar." The Virginian talks in dialect, and it's like the best thing ever, and yet he has the most amazing points to make. This book had everything in it that you would want from a book. I was just so impressed. I got through it so fast, which I kind of now wish I'd like slowed down and enjoyed it more. I'm sure I'll be rereading it someday. There's even some Jane Austen appreciation, and you know when a book has that, it's just like the final check mark. There's so many cool little touches. I don't think you ever learn the Virginian's name. He's like constantly just known as the Virginian. So anyway, I'm gonna stop myself before I go on and on about this book as well. I'm going to try to restrain myself once again because the next book I've been reading, I've also been loving. It's called A Writer's Diary, being extracts from the diary of Virginia Woolf. This is the lovely Persephone Books edition. Now I bought this back in the spring, I think. It was in a book haul. I'll try to link it up above. I know I've mentioned this in a TBR before, and when I started reading it then, I just got distracted. I think I had too many other different things that I was reading. It just didn't feel like the right time. I just didn't kind of sink into it the way you want to sink into a book when you start reading it. So I put it aside for a little while and picked it up again, and oh my gosh, I've been absolutely loving this so much. Virginia Woolf just has such cool things to say. Of course, Virginia Woolf was very literary. She moved in a really cool literary group, so it's just so fun to hear her, you know, dropping names sort of left and right. It also does make me want to read more of her books because it's cool to hear her talking about her work ethic as she like sort of sat down and kind of pounded the books out. And then also when they first came out, like she's anxious about the reviews. She's wondering whether it will do well. She's wondering, you know, what her friends will think of it. I'm not finished with this one, so I'm sure I will be enjoying reading it more, but oh my gosh, so glad I got it. This next book you've heard me talk about before. It's A City of Bells by Elizabeth Goudge. I feel like if I had to like just pick an overall favorite book, you know, like if I could only pick one, I might pick this one. If you've watched my videos before, you know that I absolutely adore Jane Austen, but I don't know how to pick a favorite because I love them all so much. It's like I couldn't pick just one. Whereas if I had to pick a favorite Elizabeth Goudge, I would pick this one. Dean's Watch is a close second, but it can't compete with A City of Bells. Elizabeth Goudge is such a great author. She's really deep, she's really spiritual, but then she's also really funny, and she has just lots of cozy moments. This book is set in an English cathedral city. Many of her books are. She writes about cathedrals like no one else does. There are always kind of characters in the book, which is kind of amazing. This book is great because the main character starts a bookshop, and then there's like a mystery because he rediscovers this manuscript and he fills it out. They put on the play and they wonder like, will the author show back up? And then there's also a romance. This is kind of like The Virginian in that it like just encompasses sort of all the different genres. It has so many of the different elements that make up a great book. Now, when I've talked about this book in the past, unfortunately it was out of print, so it was hard to get, but it has been reprinted, which is so exciting. I haven't decided if I want to order it or not, because I mean, I do have this copy, but the new cover is really cute. I'll link it down in the description along with the other books I've been mentioning. Yeah, really just can't recommend this book enough. So good. If I started reading you my favorite quotations from it, I would never stop, so I'll put them over in the blog post and just move on. This book I mentioned in my last reading wrap-up in TBR. It's called The Little Package, Pages on Life, Literature, and Landscape from a Traveling Bookman's Baggage by the author of A Passion for Books, Lawrence Clark Powell. He was a librarian. This is a collection of like little essays and talks and just really interesting, all about books, about libraries, about travel. I've loved coming across things that I know from other places in this book. For instance, one of the articles is about the great Dr. R, who is this Rosenbach, Abraham Simon Wolfe Rosenbach. He was a bookseller in Philadelphia. But if you remember, earlier this year, I actually went to Philadelphia. I met up with Kate Howe, a fellow booktuber, and we did, oh my gosh, such a cool like mystery in the library experience. And a lot of it had to do with this like mystery connected to Edgar Allan Poe and Dr. Rosenbach. So it was so cool to get like another perspective on him. Another one of my favorite articles was about books that didn't make it into his baggage, and how when he's traveled to different places all around the globe, it's brought to mind different books and different poems, and it made him wish that he had brought that book along. It's like the book was there with him even though it wasn't. This was published, I think, in the 1964. So it is kind of funny to think now, like, if there's a poem that you remember part of but can't remember the whole thing, you don't have to go to a bookshop and find a volume of that poetry. You can just plug it into Google and it'll pop right up. Lots of really cool reflections that I've been super enjoying in this. Last but not least is this book. I did a pretty good job of sticking to my TBR because a lot of these books were in my TBR. This is Drawn to Yellowstone, Artists in America's First National Park by Peter H. Hasrick. It's been really interesting. Like I mentioned that Mary Coulter book from the Grand Canyon earlier, my family went on a big road trip out west this summer. We went to the Grand Canyon, we went to Yellowstone, so it's been really cool to read more about it and read more about like the first painters. We're just talking about how the world has changed, but of course when Yellowstone first became a national park, these paintings were important because that's the only way people could see it. I guess before the painters came, lots of people had like described it and had been very hyperbolic in their language, saying, you know, it surpassed anything that's ever been seen. It's so amazing. No writer could do it justice. No painter could do it justice. But of course, the painters did come to try, and it's so cool to hear about who they were. I guess there was one painter who had become known for doing the Yosemite out in California, and he didn't really and he'd been hearing about how stunning Yellowstone was, but he didn't really hop on it. And in the meantime, this other painter, Thomas Moran, did hop on it and kind of became the quintessential Yellowstone painter. I think one of the paintings he did ended up hanging in Congress. This one, I think. In state, in a hallway, in a grand hallway. Oh my gosh, though, the paintings are just stunning. Now, we didn't get to explore all of Yellowstone, but we did see the geysers, and these colors, I love seeing them in the book because they were just as vivid in real life. Like, they were so incredible. It really did feel otherworldly. Like, there were definitely times on the trip where we felt like we were on Jakku or Jeddah or something. You really hear the painters talk about how, like, they needed to get those colors just right, because it really would be hard to get them, you know, as vibrant as they were in real life, but they do a pretty amazing job. Also cool to hear about, you know, how difficult it was sometimes to get out to these remote places, to get the sketches that they needed, about the traveling parties that went out and kind of charted Yellowstone. There's one sketch in here, I think, where they're boiling fish in a geyser, which is so fun to think about them doing that, because when we walked by the geysers, like, you could feel the heat on your face because the water was literally boiling hot, like a boiling pot on a stove. So it's funny that they didn't have to make a fire and boil water. They could just pop the fish right into the geyser, I guess. Hopefully there weren't any minerals or anything that did them harm. So those were my reads for the month of September. A number of them I haven't finished yet, so I'm sure they'll be carrying over into October. I did recently order some books that I've been wanting for a while, so I'm sure there'll be a book haul coming up, and those will probably end up being some fun reads for this month as well. Don't forget to leave me a comment and tell me about what books you've been enjoying this month, because I always get the best ideas. I am so glad whoever left this one in a comment. Thank you so much. If you're not yet, I hope you'll subscribe and join the party. I have new videos every week. Make sure you give this video a thumbs up. I hope you're having a wonderful day, and I'll talk to you guys again soon. Bye!